Welcome into Sports Around the Bar, your weekly sports talk show. As always, I'm Jake, your bartender, and I'm joined by Drew on center stool, and our special guest tonight is JP, and we're going to be talking about Duke UNC. We're going to be talking about Manny Machado and his new deal. We're also going to be talking about Bryce Harper coming up, as well as the NFC South draft grades from last year. We're going to be talking about a lot of different sports. We're going to have to get through it pretty quick before this UNC game.
Yeah, absolutely, and if you could tell, they're twins. No, they're not. They're just brothers.
Yeah, so anyway, guys, let us know in the comments who you think's winning the basketball game tonight. We have a poll going on live through the show. Early on, it was about 70% Duke, 30% UNC. Now, if you listen to Vegas, they think Duke is going to run away with this one. They started with an 11-point line. It went down to about 8.5 at one point. I think it's sitting somewhere around 9.5 right now. So they believe UNC is going to get stomped by Duke on the road in this game.
Everyone's a full believer in Zion, guy that's literally gained 100 pounds in 2 years. I mean, talk about a guy that's just dominating college basketball right now. Obviously, probably going to be the #1 pick when the draft comes. They fully believe in this guy. But Duke doesn't have the playmakers behind him like North Carolina does. Yeah, they are #1 in the poll, but Duke seems to be more of a team than it seems to be one star leading him the way.
And especially in college basketball, it's a team sport. It can go either way. JP, what do you think is going to happen in this game? Does Duke have the muscle to sit there and just overpower the UNC team that plays more as a team maybe than Duke does with all of its freshmen coming in?
Well, I certainly believe so. I mean, North Carolina is more of a team-oriented kind of organization, but I think when you have a guy like Zion, and I think another person who's criminally underrated is TJ Barrett as well. He's potentially a top 5 pick as well.
He could be. Absolutely.
I think with the amount of players that they have behind them with Duke, even though it's just a few, there'll be enough to overwhelm UNC's defense.
What's going on, Jerry? Nathan, good to see you as well. Shannon, you too. And Sharif, as always, good to see you too, man. We are sipping on the Yingling Drew brewed in the bathtub before the show, just like always. Good to see you in from Houston as well. Nathan also says there's still a 9.5-point favorite. That's the last number that I saw is 9.5. Drew, I think 9.5 is too far. I'm taking UNC in the points. I'm going to take Duke to win this game, and I think they're going to comfortably lead for most of it. I think it's going to be a 5 to 8-point lead for most of this game, and then we're going to see them pull away, put about 7-8 points, and that'll be it. I'm going to take UNC and the points in this. Would you go the same way?
Yeah, to be honest with you, even though I think North Carolina is a better team in general, I think Duke is going to win this game. You know, I just wanted to really talk about the elephant in the room. Who is paying this kind of money to watch a college basketball team? It's a game that's not even in March Madness. It's not even a tournament.
It's not a tournament. Yeah, exactly.
How important is it to everybody? It's obviously super important. Last time we saw, I think, what the numbers were 2,600. That's ridiculous. That is ridiculous.
Nathan, I agree, man. $2,600 to go see a regular season basketball game is wild, but it's the best college basketball rivalry in the nation, right? Name me one better. If you can, let me know in the comments, but I still believe it's the #1 rivalry in college basketball right now. Nathan has Duke winning this one by 7, so he's going to take UNC, I think, as well. And Matthew says he's lurking hard. Good to see you, Matthew. As always, Michael says Duke all the way. I don't know, Michael. I'm not right there. I think Duke's going to win this one. I still think they're going to pull away, but do you think they're going to cover that 9.5-point spread or 11 if that's where you started betting on this thing? No way for me. I think UNC is too good of a team to just get swept out of the way by Duke, even though it's on the road for them. UNC is going to be in this game, but I don't think they're going to win it. Does taking over the #1 spot here for Duke, do you think that impacts the play at all? Are there going to be some nerves now that they're #1 again, or do you think Tennessee falling off and them grabbing the spot is really not going to have too much of an effect on their performance?
You want to answer that first?
Sure. I don't think that it really will have that huge of an impact. I'm pretty sure that they've been in this position before, and they know how to handle themselves. Coach K has been around for a long time, and so he'll have them prepared really well for any upcoming challenges up ahead. So I don't believe it will be that big of a factor.
They've been there too many times in the past?
Perhaps.
Yeah. What about you, Drew? Do you think that kind of plays into this game now that they're the newly appointed #1, or do you see it as a non-factor for a school as big and has as much scrutiny as Duke already has?
It's so hard to say. I mean, if these were all professional athletes, I'd sit there and say the #1 ranking literally affects nothing at all. But one thing we got to think about, these are still college kids. These are kids, so
especially on Duke, where you have some freshmen coming in. Like you don't get those 4-year careers as often as other places.
When you say they've been there before, you're absolutely right. Coach K has, but about more than half of the people in his roster to play with has not been at a number 1 seed. So it is a little bit of a different. And John says he actually has them. Definitely will cover it. They're going to have them be winning by 16.
And Adam says he has Duke at -9. That's a pretty good line still. I think that's going to be close to where this game finishes. But Sharif also said it's tough calling these rivalry games because there's so much bad blood between these schools.
Right.
I mean, you talk about all time. UNC is up 137 to 111. This is their 249th meeting, almost 250. So these guys know each other. They've been in the ACC. I almost said AAF. They're still throwing me off that acronym. We're not even going to talk about them. They've been in the ACC for a long time together. You know, they're both founding schools. They're both charter schools, however you want to say it. They know each other. This isn't a surprise. And I get it. Duke has a bunch of young players, but UNC's got a few older guys on this roster as well. Duke will have some upperclassmen as well. They know each other. They hate each other. It's going to be a hard one to predict, but I still think this game does not get too far out of hand. I just don't see Duke losing this one.
Adam says Duke has freshmen, but they both have freshmen, but they're all built like full-grown men. But their brains are not developed fully, at least by the government standards. It takes you until you're like, what, 25 to be fully developed in the brain?
That is true, but even beyond all that, even beyond the psychology of it, this is the biggest platform they've ever been on. I mean, even in high school, you don't get this kind of attention. You don't get this kind of level of scrutiny from the media. I mean, Duke is on ESPN every night, it seems like, when they're talking about Zion Williamson. And everybody else, by extension, just because they're talking about Duke so much. UNC, maybe not quite the same hype train, but these guys are not used to this level of pressure. There's no way coming in as a freshman you can tell me you've experienced anything like this at this level.
Yeah, I mean, the only ones that have been there before is Roy Williams and Coach K. That's it. I mean, those two guys have been doing this for a long time, and they know each other very well. You know, all-time record were 137, North Carolina over 111, Duke. As Sharif said, in ranked, they're 23 and 27, North Carolina. I mean, or actually Duke, I'm sorry. And, I mean, these teams have been there, but I think it goes to the home crowd field. It's in the, you know, the Duke's fan base is going to be literally crowd. It's just going to be going nuts and loud. And I don't want to steal it away from him. John said he thinks that will help calm the nerves of the freshmen. I completely agree. Is it in North Carolina or is it in Duke? I'm sorry.
It's at Duke.
It's at Duke. I thought so. His comment got me confused and made me second guess myself there. But yeah, I think Duke's going to win it. I really honestly do. I think that's going to make a huge difference being at home. And it's Zion Williams. I mean, that guy's just hard to stop right now.
Adam says he's 35 and also not fully developed mentally. Well, you're at the right place. Let me tell you that.
What are you talking about? I love drinking.
Going back to this game, let's talk about the over-under because it's sitting at 165.5. Do you see both of these teams putting 80-plus points on the board in a college game, or do you see this being a little bit more of a low-scoring affair? Usually when I see this high of a line, I always want to fade it. I always want to go for the under here, but we've got two high-powered offenses. You said UNC is number 2 in the nation, if I'm right. Duke is also prolific at scoring. Do you see this going over 165.5 points?
Go ahead.
Oh well, personally, it's very tough to get that many points. So I would, if I was a betting man, I'd probably go on the under with this one. I think that both of them will be pretty high scoring, like 60s to 70s, but just that high a line will be very hard to cover, especially since I think UNC gets a little bit switched off at times. I don't think that that'll happen at all in this game because they know if they do that at all, they'll be behind.
Oh, yeah, and especially coming in as the underdog, I think they're going to be fired up. They're going on the road, especially with the crowd always going. I don't see them taking plays off. Not in that kind of environment. Not when everyone's screaming at you. You're not going to be talking about them taking any time off at all. You're not going to be seeing them laze around. This is going to be 100% pedal to the metal because this is the guys you want to upset. Like, this is, I wouldn't compare it to a Super Bowl, but this is the biggest game of the season they're probably going to play.
It's happened before. It wouldn't surprise me if it did go over 83. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Do I think it's going to happen? Probably not. But if it does, it does. And Luke, we are not based out of Kansas City. We're based out of Nashville. I'm just a huge Chiefs fan, so that's why you see all the Chiefs stuff.
Absolutely. Also, Adam says that college sports home court/field is more important than the pros. I'll agree with you. Yeah. I believe a lot of that comes down to inexperience with some of these guys because they're not used to the noise levels. They're not used to going into such hostile environments when you're that young. Even when you get to be a junior and senior, you still haven't been through it. When you get to the pros, it's like, I've done this for 10 years. I've done this for 5 years. I've done this for 15 years. I'm used to people screaming at me. I'm used to people, shouting every kind of slur or any kind of swear word at me that they possibly can. You're used to it at that point.
You'd think.
When you're 18 and you're going to this kind of environment, I mean, it's a different game, man. I don't think that can be...
Ask Ron Artest.
Well, you'd think. But I still think the experience level makes home court much more important in college. I agree with you 100% there, Adam. And also, Sharif says Luke May out of UNC is going to go bananas in this game. We're going to keep an eye out for him. I think Zion takes this one over. If you want to be the number one pick, you need to show up in these big moments. You need to show up for these big games. I see him taking this game and making a huge impact here because he's got a draft stock to worry about. Not that there's really that big of a challenger for him, but you want to cement yourself as that number one pick. This is the game to do it in.
I agree.
All right, well, why don't we move on? Why don't we talk about a little bit of baseball? Obviously, that game is going to be on at 8 o'clock Central tonight, 9 o'clock on the East Coast. We can't wait to be watching it. We're going to get out of here and watch it as soon as we're done.
Sharif, I have not washed this sweater.
Not once.
Not once. Not ever since they drafted Patrick Mahomes. It's just been dirty, and it will stay dirty until they win a Super Bowl.
Here's one more question out of the comments before we move on. Adam says that he thinks college fans and students are more passionate about their teams than maybe the pros are. Do you see that? I don't necessarily think that's 100% across the board, but I will believe that those top-end college programs and everything are probably more passionate. They're louder, and usually you get bigger stadiums. Maybe not so much in basketball, but especially when you're talking college football and you get 100,000 fans in front of you instead of 70,000, obviously it's going to be a lot louder. So I don't necessarily think it's necessarily a passion difference, but I do believe that your UNCs of the world, your mid-range colleges and stuff that aren't necessarily that total top tier like Kentucky and Duke are definitely more passionate than the mid-range in the NFL like the Browns or the Titans or anyone else. It's like they're there when they're good. When they're not, those fans usually don't show up.
Right.
Moving on, why don't we talk MLB for a few minutes? Manny Machado, if you haven't heard, got a 10-year, $300 million bank-breaking deal with the Padres. Drew, was it a good move? Should they have gone for a shorter-term deal? What's your thought process here?
It's a lot of money to give to one player for an organization that's struggling to get wins to begin with. I mean, this is definitely a signing to fill seats in their stadium. Beyond that, I mean, this is Manny's going there to make money. He's not going there to win anything. As any Padre fans out there, I'm sorry, this doesn't improve your chances at all, in my opinion. I know Michael Davis out there, man. I know you listen, MLB. You share some of your knowledge out there. Tell us what you think, man, because I just don't see this signing being anything good towards the Padres organization and future besides just selling tickets.
I don't think this is a one-year deal move. You're not signing Manny Machado and going to the playoffs. And JP, you can weigh in on this too. I don't think you're signing Manny Machado and going immediately to the playoffs. He doesn't make you a contender right away, but they have a good youth system. They've been bringing up a lot of picks out there in the Padres organization. They don't have the starting pitching yet, but you can grow that over time. This is a pick for me, or a signing for me, that's going to be very most effective 3 to 5 years into the contract when you get these young guys that have finally got some MLB experience, and then we're going to be talking about the Padres threatening. But for now, I think they're still talking about 4th or 5th in the NL West.
Real quick, Michael Davis says they have a great farm system. He said to give it 3 years.
What about you, JP? Do you like the Machado signing? Do you like $300 million for a one-star player when you don't really have a lot of other guys around him?
Well, I mean...
No disrespect to Kinsler and Hosmer.
Absolutely, but I think when it comes to the Padres, it's almost a move that you have to make. And also, there's a good part of the contract where there's a fifth-year option, so in case of things just absolutely blow up and nothing goes right, you can restart without having that second half of the contract to worry about.
True, and you weren't doing anything for these next 5 years anyway. I love the signing. I love the aggressiveness. Look, they looked around and they said, things aren't going the way we want them to, obviously. We haven't had a winning season since 2010. You need to change things up, so they opened the wallet. They managed to Shanghai this deal from the White Sox, who I heard offered him a very similar contract. They brought in his brother-in-law. They brought in his best friend in John Jay, and he still snubbed him, so I don't know what the Padres said to him. But obviously he was convincing enough to get him to sign out there in San Diego rather than Chicago. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe he was like, I want to spend my time on the beach instead of up there in the Chicago snowstorms.
Good possibility. What's going on, Steve? And Will said he doesn't care. He's not going to see him because they're not going to be facing his Cubs.
Well,
as much.
Well, that's true. I was going to say he won't be in the same city, but he will be in the NL with the Cubs as opposed to playing with the White Sox, which are an AL team. So you'll see him a little bit. I don't really see them overpowering the Cubs anytime soon. I think the Cubs are sitting in a spot where they're going to win right now. And the Padres are still a growing team. Just because you sign one free agent doesn't make you a playoff contender in baseball. You need a whole team around him. Like I said, this is a growth move. And to me, I think this is a great one because if you look at his batting average, you look at the way he's played, you can use that kind of bat until he's about 32, 33, 34. So I like this contract. I like the 10-year lockdown. They signed a 26-year-old for the prime of his career. Yeah, it was a lot of money, and it's a gamble, but like you said, they have the option to get out of it. I'm in love with the Padres move. I really am.
Michael says he's heard that Harper has turned down a few $100 million plus contracts, and he's glad that Manny is out of the NL East. You know, to be honest with you, I think Bryce Harper's looking for that team that has the best chance of winning. I honestly think Bryce Harper's more that wanting to win a championship and put his legacy in that way. I mean, that's just how I feel. I mean, if that's true, I've also heard the rumors that he's declined some of these contracts. I mean, maybe he's looking for that right team, the right organization to win championships.
I really do just think he was waiting on Machado to get his contract first, so he can sit there and say, "You don't owe me $300 million. You owe me $330. You owe me $315." I think he just wants to be the highest paid free agent. And the Phillies are going to do it. I really do believe they already have this deal done. I haven't heard about any other teams, but we didn't really hear about the Padres until the Machado thing was done either. Maybe someone swoops in and steals Bryce Harper at the last minute, but I just don't see it, Drew. I think the Phillies are just going to have to man up. They're going to have to pay him a little bit more than what Machado got, and they're kind of in a similar situation, but closer to the playoffs than the Padres.
I get what you're saying, and I understand that whole scenario, but these guys are professionals. They go into these contract talks, and they're already going, hey, I already know Manny's going to ask about $300. I'm already asking for $350. This has already been in these conversations. Now, maybe the other teams are like, no, we're not going to offer you that much. This is what we're going to offer you, and that's why he's turning them down. But I still think when he goes into these contract talks, that's already being talked about. Steve, I'm sorry about your loss, man. I'm sorry your Daytona trip got cut short. Man, I hope everything's good. You know, thoughts and prayers out to you and your family.
Sharif also says a 10-year contract never works in baseball. And let me say this. I agree with you. It's a scary thing signing a guy for 10 years, but they did put that little escape clause in there 5 years down the road. So if things don't work out, Manny hits 31, you're like, his best baseball's behind him, you can cut him loose. You don't owe him the rest of that $150 million. It's an escape deal. I like that. I mean, if he's absolutely rocking, you can sit there and say, we'll bite the bullet and we'll live out the contract. Or if he's somewhere in the middle, you can deny that option and renegotiate with him. I think the Padres played this masterfully well. There's that window to get out of there. And let's face it, if he does just go in there and he's not the same guy, he's terrible for the next 5 years, were the Padres really that much worse off? Do you see the Padres making any single move that gets them closer to the playoff beyond this? I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Well, I mean, when it comes to 10-year deals, is there actually one that I can think of that has worked out?
John Gruden.
Well,
we'll know about that later.
But A-Rod.
That's
Which,
true.
I mean,
that is true. I feel like I'm not going to say that was a great deal, but
they won a championship with A-Rod.
Well, the Yankees win like every other year, so is that impressive?
Not every other year.
What's it, like 30?
It's been a few years. What was it? I think it was
09, I think?
9? I was going to say 07. So it's been a while.
Which is a good thing for all of baseball, in my opinion. I'm tired of seeing the Yankees win it every year. But going back to it, I'll agree with you. 10-year contracts, they're a risky thing, but when you put that escape clause in there, it's not that big of a deal because you can always, like I said, if he's somewhere in the middle or you don't think he's that same guy, you cut him after the first 5 years and you renegotiate with him. And if he moves on, and you avoid paying a guy $30 million who's not playing all-star level baseball. How about these comments? Let's see. Just real quick. Luke says the Kansas City Royals will not see a World Series for another 30 years. Agreed. It's not looking good. I mean, at least you got the one, right?
Yeah.
I'll wait for it.
Think so?
Yeah, I'll wait for it. Yeah, why not?
One is enough?
No, I had 2 in my lifetime.
Well, it's exciting at least. I mean, I'm not going to sit there and say they're going to challenge anytime soon, but baseball's a weird sport. Sometimes you hit on a couple guys, they come up through the minors, then all you got to do is make a couple key signings and you're ready to go.
Yep.
Things change quick in baseball. Teams do not stay consistent, so I'm not going to say 30 years, maybe 5, 10 before we're just talking about them being a serious threat again.
Luke, I don't know why you're hating on the Royals, man. I mean, come on, dude. Come on. Why? Is it because of me? Is it because I like them? Jeez, man. Is it? Oh,
yeah.
I understand. Well, it's not like the Padres where they haven't won anything in ever. Yeah.
Also, Adam says he really thought he was going to see Machado, I believe, as a Cub, but he doesn't see it happening now, or maybe Bryce Harper. No, I don't think so. Not at that dollar value. They already have a lot of bats in Chicago. They already have a pretty good rotation when it comes to starting pitching. They need to add to their bullpen, and I think if you're going to spend big on somebody, it'll be to acquire a bullpen member that can actually make an impact, or 2, because right now, that's the biggest hang-up for me. I've heard they've talked about adding Kimbrel as a closer here recently, and if they can do that, if they can bring in a great closer that can finish games and they can bring in another good mid reliever, I feel like the Cubs will be right back up in the doorstep for winning another World Series. But they need to get that relief going in there. They're losing too many games in the bullpen right now, I think.
Jared, that doesn't surprise me. You're a Royals fan. You must be from the Kansas City area. Gary says he's an Orioles fan. We'll grow up from the ground up. Man, I've been saying that for a while now with that organization, and it seems like every time they have a possibility of being good, they let some of their big name players walk out. I think they have an issue with signing some of that long-term deal, or those people. Ever since, what's his name, Cal Ripken Jr. Retired, you guys have struggled to keep some of your big names in Baltimore. I think that's a struggle that organization has, and they got to definitely figure out how to fix that going forward.
And it's a huge issue being one of the farm teams in baseball. I mean, the Indians had this for years when I was growing up watching them. You grow up guys like Cliff Lee and CC Sabathia that were going to be ace pitchers for everybody. They get good, and right about that time, they go on and get the massive deal from somebody else, and they leave Cleveland in the dust or Baltimore. They're kind of in a similar situation where they're not a respected enough organization to land any big-time free agents, and they can't keep their own players. That's the hardest thing to get over in baseball, in my opinion.
And Gary says they had a shot to win the World Series. You're right, they did, but the thing is, they didn't keep any of those players or try to rebuild around them to keep that momentum going. It seems like they're always so eager to just wash out their talent. At least that's what it seems like. I don't follow them fully like I should. So, Gary, tell us if we're wrong. Let us know, man.
Gary also says you have to look like he's getting paid for his past years of success in a way, since rookie deals are so low. Look, I understand the thought process, but as a GM, you can't sit there and say, what has he done for me in the past? It all needs to be about what is he going to do for me in the future, and you're getting these guys in the prime of their career. You're getting them at 26 and 27 years old, so you're buying the best baseball, basically. And in baseball, you can stay effective into your 30s, especially with the bat. You can stay effective into your mid to late 30s even. Do I see either one of these guys being a 36-year-old stud? Probably not, because a lot of their game relies on speed and their fielding ability. I don't see them being long-term players, which is the only concern for this. But as long as you build in a clause like the Padres have where you can escape these deals, there's no problem for me. I think that's fine. You can give them big money for 5 years, especially if you're a mid-range team, and get away with it. So I don't hate that deal for the Padres. I expect Bryce Harper to have something very similar, except the dollar value just a little bit higher, and I think that's why we haven't seen him sign yet. He wanted to see what Machado was going to do.
Gary's actually going to call you out. He's saying that is actually false, that they can draw free agents, but we have an owner that refuses to drop real money on the player, and that's where
still talking Orioles?
That's where I'm coming.
Are we talking Orioles?
Yeah.
Well, you can draw some free agents, but you're not signing guys like Machado. You're not signing the top-level talent that is going to take to win a World Series. That's where I'm coming in and telling you that it's not just that place, it's not Baltimore, it's the ownership. It's the people that aren't willing to put that money towards it. That's where that ownership is willing to wash your talent out and try to start from the beginning. If they would sit there and spend a little bit of money, we talk about the Baltimore Orioles actually being a legitimate team year in and year out. Until they figure that out, I think you're going to get that 1 year where you're almost there, a couple years where you're almost there, but then those names are going to get too big for that organization, and they're going to let them walk for a little bit more money. That's where I'm saying that you're having an issue with the Baltimore Orioles. I definitely don't think you have issue. I don't think any team has an issue bringing in high free agents. I mean, look at what just the Padres did. When has the Padres been remotely decent, and they're willing to spend a little bit of money? Is it to fill up seats? Well, maybe, but they just did it. So why can't the Baltimore Orioles do it? Well, let me use his example here. He says they paid Ubaldo Jimenez, they paid Cobb, they paid Trumbo, they paid Chris Davis. So you got a couple power bats that absolutely fell off, and they're not the same guy they used to be because they had their flash seasons and didn't necessarily hold up with the test of time. Do you see Machado as a guy like that that's only a flash? I mean, I see him as much more consistent hitter than those guys, and that's what you need, consistency. As for Ubaldo Jimenez, I mean, he had that good year with the Rockies. Except for that, I mean, he's not that good of a pitcher. He really isn't. He's not an ace, in my opinion. He's a second, third, fourth guy that can be a good rotational guy, but he's not the guy that wins a World Series for you. So you're talking about all these guys that they brought in as free agents, and yes, they've opened the wallet to spend money on them, but does that bring them any closer to the World Series is what I want to know. They're not signing the top-end talent for the big money. They're signing guys that are in the mid-range that even though you're going to pay them a lot of money, you're not going to win a World Series with them. So I'm not saying the O's can't sign anybody. It's not like the Padres from years past where like nobody wanted to play there, right? But you can't sit there and tell me with this free agency class and everything where nobody that is a serious playoff contender is considering signing with you. You can't tell me that there's not an issue that needs to be fixed in Baltimore.
Gary, I'm not knocking your Orioles. I'm just saying what I feel like, man. I'm glad that you're so passionate about it. It seems like you've been a fan for a really long time. I really do hope that at some point in time that they're willing to spend a little bit of more money again towards some of these big name players. Like you said in the early 2000s, they did do it. I think they need to do it one more time. I think they need to keep doing it. When you see people like this or these players like this that are developing and becoming big names, sometimes it's worth to spend a little bit more money to keep them around.
Michael Davis also says the Orioles operate like the A's and the Rays, and I'll agree with you, Mike. I think that's a pretty good comparison where they're all trying to play this Moneyball style of we don't want to spend like the big teams, we just want to win. The problem is the big teams now know about all the sabermetrics. They know about all the next level stats and everything. So they've kind of evolved past the old thinking in baseball where you just, does he pass the eye test? I don't see you as a low-dollar team competing with these teams consistently year in and year out just by playing smarter than them. You have to open the wallet in baseball with the uncapped salary cap like they have. So the system's kind of rigged against the smaller teams in baseball. We haven't talked about that a lot, but it really is. And that's why you see teams like the Yankees winning 30. That's why you see teams like the Cardinals being so successful, because they're willing to open the wallet when they need to. And I just don't see the Orioles as that team.
Well,
I don't.
Let's not ignore every 30 years the Royals win one. So
I'm not saying push that out. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm saying consistently, is it going to happen though? Probably not. When all is said and done, if you want to be consistently good in baseball, you need to pay the top level guys. That's why I love the Padres mantra where they're like, we got to go get this guy. I'm okay with that. I really am. So moving on, we don't have to dwell on baseball because we have an NFC team. We've gone on long enough, I think. We have an NFC division we want to grade their draft in. Guys, let us know in the comments, what do you like about the Machado deal? Does Harper get paid more? We want to know what you're thinking as well.
Just run real quick here. Sharif, I know you're a diehard anything out of Baltimore. I know you live down in Houston, but you must have lived in Baltimore before then. And Jeremy wants to know, what do you guys see the Cubs doing this year? And then we'll go on to football.
Sorry, say that one more time?
He wants to know what he thinks, what we think the Cubs are going to do this year.
Look, I think the Cubs are going to be good. They have the bats, in my opinion. They're good enough in the field, I think, to challenge for the World Series. Like I said, man, I want to see them add to that bullpen. I know they already have a high-dollar team where they're paying a lot of these guys, where they're on their World Series run right now, and they maybe don't have the money to sit there and throw at the bullpen, but I think that's their biggest weakness. If they want to win this, though, they need that Aroldis Chapman. They need the guy who can close out games for them, and they also need a reliever or two that they can lean to in a pinch. I think they lost too many games when they go to the bullpen. I like Lester. I like the rest of their starters with Darvish. They also have Cole Hamels as well. I like that lineup. I'm forgetting one of them. They have one more guy that's a stud, and I can't think what his name is right now. I like their starting pitching. I think they're strong enough at starting pitching. I think they need to work on that bullpen if they're going to win the World Series again, though, because just because you get 5, 6, 7 quality innings, if you come in the 8th and the game is close and your bullpen blows it, it's still a loss. I'm not real wild about the Cubs, and I am a Cubs fan. If they're going to win this World Series again, they got to work on this bullpen.
Yeah, I agree. We'll move on to football. I was just going to say their batting has no issue. It's their bullpen that you got to worry about, and you pretty much nailed it. So,
well, anyway, why don't we talk about the Buccaneers? And JP, I'm going to let you lead off here because we've kind of been drowning you out a little bit.
It's okay.
What is your favorite pick for this Buccaneers draft? Because I look at this board, and as also my NFC team is the Buccaneers, I'm not wild about this draft.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot to be wild about. I mean, Vea, as their first-round pick, didn't do awful, and he did get hurt at the first part of the season, so there wasn't really there wasn't as much tape as I would have liked to have seen, but he didn't do that bad for not playing that long.
I agree. He did have some injuries to get over as well. He did perform well late when he was healthy. He was in the game. You know, Gerald McCoy missed some time as well. He only had 3 sacks, but from the interior line, that's not necessarily a problem. To me, he's a bit of a question mark. Maybe he turns into a great D tackle. Maybe he turns into just another guy on the defensive line. So when I look at that as your best draft pick, I start to sit there and worry about this draft class. Drew, do you see any other shining stars in this group?
Well, I want to talk about their first pick. You guys can't just talk about Vita Vea and not let me talk about it because I absolutely love this pick. If it wasn't for the fact that he got injured before the season even started, we'd be talking about a guy that'd have going into training camp, go in all the mini sessions and learn how this team develops, learn how to play around your players. He had to come in the middle of the season where he only got 8 starts. He played 13 games. This guy had to develop himself in time games. And don't get me wrong, they're practicing, but the practicing is such small now with all the player contract that's out there. When you look at it, you know, he had 3 sacks, but look who he's playing around. He's got McCoy, he's got JPP, who seems to have sacks fall into him, like you said before postgame. I like this pick. I absolutely do like it. I think it's just going to have to be another season behind him, or mini camp and training camp off season behind him, that he can develop and be better. Do I think he's a guy that turns this defense around? Absolutely not. I think this defense still has a lot of struggles in other places, especially in their secondary. But I like this pick more than it seems like you guys do.
I still like the pick. I still think he's got some upward potential. I think he's going to be good, but there's already the injury concerns, and I don't like to harp on injury. Usually that's your deal. I don't like harping on injury because everybody gets hurt in the NFL. But I'd look at this pick, and I'm like, was he a significant improvement over Gerald McCoy? Not really. Did he contribute a ton this year? Also not really. I don't know, Drew. I think he's going to be a good D tackle, but I don't see him like the guys in Washington that are going to be dominant D tackles in the NFL.
I don't think that he was supposed to be better. I think he was just supposed to be... The combo was supposed to be great.
But you don't draft for need, and they needed help on the interior, even with Gerald McCoy. But drafting totally for need is not a good thing.
I'll agree with you. He was not a dire need when they drafted him at number 12. This is more just taking the best player off the board, and I think he absolutely was at this point. I think it was a great spot for him being picked. But you're right. This was not a need. I think they should have focused heavily more on the corners and the defensive backs, where they did in the second round.
Gary also says the Buccaneers are the Orioles of the NFL, and I'm gonna do you one better, Gary. They're worse because at least, like you said, the Orioles have the Red Sox and the Yankees who can consistently outspend them. You're not outspending anybody in football. The Buccaneers just make bad decisions. So as much as you want to sit there and say that the Orioles are the NFL, I think you got to give the Orioles more props than that.
Jerry goes, I agree with everything Drew says. Shreve says Drew for president 2020.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
I got too much skeletons in the closet. That won't go well.
Gary also says, besides Aaron Donald, defensive tackles don't rack up sacks. I think we're starting to see a change in that position. We've seen guys like Nakamada and Sue that have kind of revolutionized what the defensive tackle needs to be doing. We're focusing more on interior pressure, whereas whether they're racking up the sack themselves or they're making the quarterback uncomfortable in the pocket and letting somebody else get him, we're seeing pressure from the interior become more and more important. So that's why I kind of focus on Vea only having the 3 sacks, not being as effective as some of these other guys at pushing the pocket and making these quarterbacks uncomfortable. So while I agree with you, 10 years ago we weren't worried about our defensive tackles generating sacks. Today, I think the game has totally changed. I think the better of an interior pass rush you're going to have, it's going to make it so much easier on these defensive ends. That's why I think it's a big focus.
Well, after they hit, in my opinion, a home run after their first pick, they kind of fumbled the ball in the second round where they had 3 picks. I mean, let's go with the number 1 in the second round, Ronald Jones the second. I know that you absolutely adore this pick, Jake.
Oh, yeah. No, I love Ronald Jones. He's Trent Richardson again, which is what I could say. It was the first red flag for me when they took him out of the second round, and it's in the preseason, and a reporter asked Dirk Cotter at the time, they said, are you worried about him not finding the holes that are opening up for him? And he goes, that's not a problem. He doesn't have a problem with that, when clearly on tape he has a problem with it. Look, this is looking like a bust.
His 1.9 yard average doesn't concern you at all?
It's concerning when you have, it's very concerning. I think they wasted a second-round pick, and I liked Ronald Jones is the problem. I wasn't saying he was a first-round pick by any means, but I liked Ronald Jones coming out in the draft, and obviously his career at USC was much better, I believe, than what he's going to see in the NFL when you can't beat out a guy like Peyton Barber for the starting spot in Tampa Bay. It's a waste of a pick for me. It's too early to say his career's not going to happen, but Drew, if I'm Tampa Bay, I'm thinking about who's going to be my running back after this year.
Well, but let's look deeper into the second round where they did draft a couple of cornerbacks, and I mean there was one that did have a good amount of starts for Tampa Bay, but there's kind of a problem with that because of the other team. One of the other teams we're going to mention drafted a cornerback later that was much better than that guy, and
absolutely. I mean, I think they kind of whiffed not taking the Panthers. Drawing a blank here. What's his name?
Dante Jackson.
Dante Jackson. Thank you. They drew a whiff picking both of their corners before Dante Jackson, or at least one of their corners before Dante Jackson and MJ Stewart. They could have had that guy who is a consistent starter. He looked like a defensive player of the year. We're going to talk about him more later here in a second. But they took Carlton Davis, who you like. Do you think he can grow into this? They also took MJ Stewart, another cornerback. They got 17 starts between these guys, Drew.
I think MJ Stewart must have been something on tape or something that they met with this guy that just goes, okay, we're falling in love with this guy, because he was not in my second round at all. I had him falling either to the third or fourth round. But Carlton Davis, in my opinion, was a first-round talent. I was quite surprised that he fell this far in the second round. I still like this pick. He's the guy that had 12 starts. He played 13 games. He had 40 tackles. Forced fumble recovery. This guy seems to be developing into the right scenario. We got to remember though, these Bucks just got thrown the ball all over. They got lit apart. And when you
They were
have
26th in passing.
and when you have a tandem of corners that are rookies, go ask the Packers, it doesn't always work in your favor. This takes a little bit for these guys to develop.
It's definitely a growth
maybe MJ
position.
Stewart will get a little bit better, but I fully believe in Carlton Davis. I think he is a guy that can develop into a number one corner. And, you know, as soon as they get rid of Brett Grimes in that contract and that guy always being injured at, I don't know, was he 45?
Yeah.
It will be a little bit different. Give these guys a little bit more starts. I think they're on the right path to being a better secondary, but I'm not in love with these picks. I'm just not after the very first one.
I'm right there with you. And Steve also says the Bucs are headed towards Cleveland territory, circa 2008. Our thoughts? I think you hit the nail on the head, but I think they've already been there. You said heading towards. I think they're already there. And it kind of shows you they're just making all these bad decisions in the draft. They're not really hitting on any of these guys. Maybe you can say Jordan Whitehead, their fourth-round safety, was a decent player. But they played a lot of secondary snaps with rookies this year. Maybe these guys evolve as a group, but I really didn't see anything out of any one of these guys that I'm like, look out for him next year. Or he needs to be the starter next year. Every one of them for me is basically replaceable.
Gary said running backs are dime a dozen besides Saquon Barkley. You can find them anywhere. Look at Philip Lindsay.
And that is absolutely true. But let me say this. When you spend a second-round pick on a running back, he better be good.
That was my thing.
He better be good.
He was the 38th pick overall. If you're taking him, he needs to be playing every single game, every down that you can have him out there because it's way too high of a pick.
At least he's got to make an impact.
To sit there and have 44 yards and a touchdown.
At least he's got to make an impact, and we did not see that at all. There was no impact. They didn't start him in a single game this year. He was active for 9, but obviously, like I said, when it comes down to Dirk Cotter sitting there saying, that's not an issue. He can see fine. There's a problem.
And Sharif, I agree with you. He says the Bucs coaching staff is solid and they will be fine. I'm saying like 7-9, 8-8. I agree with you. I think that's what's going to happen with them.
I think they're taking a step back. I mean, I like the coaching hire, but I still think they're taking a step back because...
How do you take a step back?
You lose more games, Drew.
0 wins?
Or 3 or 2 or 1. Yeah, I mean, look, I think they're going to take a step back. I think that defense still needs a ton of players. Obviously, they have this offseason to build, but I don't see them overnight snapping their fingers and getting good. Your big signing or your big trade last year was JPP, which, even though he had 12.5 sacks, did not grade well as a defensive end. A lot of those things kind of fell to him. Gerald McCoy's getting older. Vita Vea's had injury problems. There's no shining stars on that defense. And then you go and look at the offensive side of the ball, and you're like, we still got Jameis Winston. Ryan Fitzpatrick is even probably going to move on as a quarterback. And I'm worried about the Buccaneers, but let's grade this draft.
Just real quick, and this is I believe, unless I'll have to relook at it, this is the only quarterback and wide receiver tandem that's going to cost them $41 million this year. You got 21 going to Jameis, you got 20 going to Mike Evans. This is an expensive tandem. They better be up there in rankings for that kind of money.
Steve says 5-11. We're going to talk about that more in the offseason after we see what the draft and the free agency looks like for these teams. But, Drew, we need to grade this draft class, man. The Buccaneers, like I said, didn't have that good of a draft class after the first pick. If you like Vita Vea, what would you give him for a grade?
It would be an F if it wasn't for Vita Vea, but I really do like that pick. I do fully believe in this guy. I think one more offseason, he's going to turn himself around. I give it a C+.
JP, what do you think?
I give it a C because the Vea pick isn't bad, but the worst part of it is Carlton Davis. I mean, I'm not saying that he's a bad player, but you had more potential there, and you let him slip.
Absolutely. I like Carlton Davis in the second round. Again, we were talking about this guy maybe being a first-round pick, but the fact that everyone in the NFL let this guy slide, and he turned out to be, I'm not going to say a bust, but he didn't play particularly well, kind of shows you that the Buccaneers were just the first one to bite on the bait and got tricked into drafting this guy. Also, Steve says 5-11. Like I said, we'll get into that later. And Sharif says Bowles will fix the defense. I think you could have the best coaching in the world. If you don't have any players, you're still going to have a bad defense. And they've got to work on that. They've got to be able to fix that.
Where do you rank him?
I'm going to give him a C-. I still think the Vita Vea is a question mark. It's a good question mark because maybe he turns into a great D tackle. Maybe not. Maybe he's just an average guy. And then the rest of the draft is almost a wash for me. Maybe 1 or 2 of these secondary players survive. But that's not good enough. When you have this number of picks, when you have 3 second-round picks and a first, you got to do better than this.
Gary's got him at a C-, Steve's got him at a D-, and Jerry's got him at a D-.
Sharif also says D+ as well. Obviously, you guys are a little bit harsher on him than we are, but going forward, they're going to have to do better if they're going to get out of the basement. They're not going 8-8 with these kind of draft classes. All right, let's move on. Let's talk Falcons next. Round 1, it started with Calvin Ridley. Obviously, we're going to sing his praises because he was fantastic. 10 touchdowns. To me, this is a home run pick.
Oh, absolutely. You know, there was a wide receiver taking it before him from Carolina, DJ Moore, but when they took him at number 26, did they really know they were getting a number one wide receiver? I mean, this guy seems to be able to develop into that. Yeah, Matt Ryan's throwing the ball. All you haters can hate on Matt Ryan. I'm sure they're out there. But it seemed like this guy found himself open when he needed to be. He seemed to be able to make those football moves that you want to see out of a wide receiver. To get a number one talent in the first round of a wide receiver is actually hard to do in the NFL. A lot of these number one round or
the first round
receivers seem to fail a lot, but on this one, he definitely was not failing. I love this pick, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to concur because he might have been a little bit overshadowed in Atlanta's offense for a time, where he's had games where he's completely taken over. But that's the best part of it, is that he's shown that he's able to do well to the point of being a number one receiver unquestionably.
Exactly. Do we have Julio Jones' replacement here?
Potentially, yes.
Maybe not next year, but in a couple of years down the line when Julio's kind of phased out
when
of
his
the league.
talent starts to drop a little bit. Yeah, I believe so.
I do too. I love this pick. I don't think you could have done any better. Sharif also says 35 minutes to tip off. Don't worry, Sharif. We'll have you out of here in time. Also, Steve says Calvin Ridley is absolutely legit, and he also said Roll Tide. Look, I'm not going to agree with the Roll Tide part, but you're right. Calvin Ridley is a boss. Guy killed it. Matthew also says he likes Matt Ryan. I do too. I mean, 4,700 yards with a bad offensive coordinator and Steve Sarkisian, in my opinion. I think they maximized what they could get out of him, and Matt Ryan is still maybe not in that top tier of quarterback, but close to it. Let's go on to the rest of their draft. It's not quite as star-studded throughout, but they got a lot of role players. Isaiah Oliver, a cornerback, he was a good role player for them. Deidrin Senat, defensive tackle, another role player. Ito Smith, running back role player. Foy Olukun, I believe is how you pronounce it, another role-playing linebacker. They've got guys throughout this draft, whether it's the 6th round, the 4th round, the 3rd round, the 2nd round. They got guys who could impact this team. Even if they didn't make a huge impact, they were making plays as rookies. To me, that's important to see.
Right, all these players, like you said, are role players, but they're picking them behind spots that they really didn't need them for. You know, they have linebackers. They have the only one I can really see is defensive tackle. They're in a need for that. They have corners, so it's nice to see that they can sit there and draft these 3rd and 4th people behind them. So when you sit there and you look, well, games started aren't that great. You know, their stats aren't that great, but remember, they're not playing full time. They're just going in there and covering when they're exhausted. So you kind of have to like them, these picks, even though none of them seem to be, like you said, star-studded. It still seemed to be the right position for those picks.
Well, I mean, when it comes to those rookies, some of them did have to play a little bit because of Atlanta's basically general hospital season, where everybody just got hurt all over.
Exactly.
And yeah, they did admirably.
Did they step up well enough for you? It's good enough.
They were decent. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
even though the defense wasn't there, I'm going to say it's good enough because again, you get a lot of these guys coming into these positions where maybe they're not. Like I said, Foy with the linebacker, a 6th round pick stepping up to play. He was active for all 16 games, Drew. He started 7 of them. That's pretty good for a 6th round pick, right?
Right. No, it is absolutely. And you know, I like this draft of theirs. I don't think it's just an amazing draft like the Saints had 2 years ago.
Right.
But I do like this draft. I think it was what the Falcons needed. Unfortunately for their season, like you said, was completely injury prone. They struggled everywhere across to keep people healthy. Maybe this year will be a little bit different.
I agree. Now, Gary said something in the comments that I cannot let stand. He says someone from Matt Ryan's draft class has a ring, and it's not him. You're right. Joe Flacco does have one. But at this point, would you take Matt Ryan or Joe Flacco? Let me ask you that, Gary. You must be a Baltimore fan because you've been singing their praises all day long. Look, I'm going to give the Falcons a B+ for this draft class. It starts with Calvin Ridley, and all the way through, they got effective players. Even if they're not starters, even if they're not elite players by any means, they can grow into those roles. I like almost every one of their picks. The only one I didn't really think was great was Russell Gage, wide receiver, but he's still active for 15 games. He's still involved. I think they didn't miss on a single one of these guys. And for me, that's going to give them a B+. Even though they didn't hit a bunch of home runs, they got quality players, and that's what I want to see out of my draft.
I'm going to give them a B. And it's just because I love the Calvin Ridley pickup, but after that, even though they got people where they need to be, none of them shined when they had a chance to shine.
Steve is also going B+. JP, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll give him a B because there was, of course, that one home run, but I don't think that there was anybody that was going to completely wow you there. But they did do admirably, so overall, a B.
Damon, I'm glad you can join us, and you always keep us up-to-date, information and news. We appreciate it. Just, keep informing us about baseball, hockey, whatever you watch.
Exactly. Jerry is also going to be on this, so we agree it was a pretty good draft for the Falcons. Why don't we move on to the Panthers here really quick? Let's talk about DJ Moore with their first pick. They had Calvin Ridley still on the board when they grabbed him at number 24, but they chose to go with DJ Moore instead, Drew. Do you think long-term this can pan into a better decision, or do you see Calvin Ridley as the number one receiver like he should have been or like he was projected last year?
This was a head-scratcher. I definitely scratched my head when they took him. I was going, this guy didn't have the height. This guy didn't have the physical kind of body type that they love having Cam Newton throw the ball to. He's a little bit smaller. He's a little bit of a speedster. So it was a question mark for me. But when I saw this guy play, and when he started actually having a chance when he was healthy, he played all 16 games, but it seemed like he was banged up. He definitely seems like he's talented. Do I have him over Calvin Ridley? Absolutely not, but they must have seen something in him that they liked a little bit more than Calvin Ridley.
And what do you think? Did they make the right decision going with DJ Moore first? Does this turn into the better pick?
I don't think so. I'm not exactly the biggest DJ Moore fan, but I think that it would help if he had a bit more consistent quarterback play.
Absolutely. That is one big point that we have not talked about is that Matt Ryan versus Cam Newton when it comes to passing the ball as quarterback. There is a huge drop-off, I think, when you talk about Matt Ryan, the pocket passer, the guy who slings the ball for almost 5,000 yards, versus Cam Newton, who, like you said before, Drew, is sitting somewhere around 55% completion rating. So DJ Moore, for me, even though he only has 2 touchdowns versus Calvin Ridley's 10, I still don't think it's that big of a deal because he still managed to win the yards after catch. He's still making things happen by himself by catching the ball and making things happen after the play. I just think every other measurable goes to Ridley. I do believe they got the wrong guy here. I think DJ Moore, even though he's a good pick, is not a home run for me.
I think he can develop into one. Is it Cam Newton throwing the ball that makes him a better receiver or not? I think it's definitely the not. But at some point in time, this guy's talent is going to show. I mean, look at it. 55 receptions, 788 yards. He only had 2 touchdowns, but, I mean, this guy was moving the ball when he had it in his hand.
Steve also says Calvin Ridley in that Carolina offense would have been fire. I don't know about that. I'm going to be honest with you. We might be talking about this being flipped if DJ Moore went to Atlanta and Calvin Ridley went to Carolina because I think a lot of it comes down to the quarterback play. It takes 2 to tango when it comes to the passing game. Matt Ryan to Calvin Ridley or Matt Ryan to DJ Moore is still far superior to Cam Newton to either one of those guys, in my opinion. Could they have used him a little bit better than DJ Moore? I don't know. Maybe you got a few extra yards, but I still see this as kind of more of a quarterback issue rather than which of these receivers is really that good.
Well, let's talk about their home run hit in the second round. That obviously this guy should have been the second corner picked after Denzel Ward. And that's Dante Jackson from LSU. I mean, this guy, he had 16 starts. He played every single game. He had 4 interceptions, 74 tackles, 1 sack, 9 pass deflects, 1 forced fumble. This guy was all over the field playing great football for a second-round pick. They get a home run here.
Absolutely. And JP, what do you think about this pick?
Oh, I love it. I mean, to be able to get the second best corner at this spot at the very low end of the second round is very, very great.
Absolutely. I'm going to sit there and say it's a home run. I don't think you quite did it justice. I'm going to call it a home run, though, and I'm going to sit there and say that Dante Jackson going second overall is maybe the steal of this draft. I mean, the guy in the first half of the season looked like the defensive player of the year. I get it dropped off a little bit, but I think that was just an entire consistency thing with the entire Panthers. If you remember, they were 6-2 at one point, I believe, and then won a 6-game slide and were absolutely terrible through that stretch. I don't think you can put that all on him.
No.
Fantastic cornerback, fantastic pickup in the second round, and you said he was behind Denzel Ward. I'd argue he might have had the better year. It's just the rest of the team kind of was more inconsistent about him. We might be talking about this as the best cornerback out of this draft 5 years from now. And that's saying a lot because Denzel Ward played really well.
We'll see. Denzel Ward's a stud. There's no doubt about it.
He is. But Dante Jackson, also a stud. The way he's playing, man, you can't sit there and tell me that the two were just that far apart on performance.
Damon says, Women's Ice Hockey League, I fully believe it. And he says, where can I buy sports around the bar memorabilia?
Coming soon.
Yeah, it is actually coming soon.
We'll keep you updated. Moving on, though, Drew, the rest of this draft, it kind of drops off from there. They had Ian Thomas, a tight end, that had put a little bit of work in with Greg Olsen out with injury, but beyond that, they didn't get a lot of the depth draft where they had a lot of contributors. Do you see that as a problem, or do you see that as more of just a wait-and-see kind of scenario?
It's so hard to say. It's probably more of a wait-and-see scenario. Yeah.
It's wait and see.
It's wait and see.
He's still hung up on the women's ice hockey.
I am.
We'll
I'm
talk about
stuck
that
on
next show. Tune in for that. Anyway, going back to this draft grade, I want to give it a B. And I thought about going B-. I thought about going a little bit lower because the rest of their draft didn't work out. But you look at DJ Moore. Very competent player. Did his best he could do with quarterback injuries and Cam Newton. Still put up a pretty good stat line for a rookie as well. Then Dante Jackson, absolute home run for me. I look at how do you hit on the top end of the draft, and then everything else is icing on the cake. So I got to give it a B because they absolutely hit in their first 2 picks, right?
No, absolutely. And I actually am more in love with these 2 picks. I think they did a great job. I think the reason DJ Moore, like I said, is not as great as he could have been is because Cam Newton's throwing him the ball. I have to give it an A-. I am fully about these first 2 picks. Even if the rest of them don't work out, when you get a starting corner and a starting wide receiver in your first 2 picks, you are good to go.
Steve is going solid B. Jerry's going B-. JP, round us out, man. How did they do?
You beat me to the punch, Jerry. I'm giving it a B-. I mean, I do look at the 2 picks, and I like them a lot. But but the bottom end of the draft is kind of how bad teams form.
Right.
It's where you don't really find anybody that's worth keeping 2 or 3 years down the line, and that can turn into a huge problem if this is a consistent thing.
I agree with you. I would have liked to see a little bit more out of the bottom end of the draft. I think that's why they're in the B range for me instead of the A. But growing, again, a lot of these guys, it's too early in their career to sit there and say that it's a bust. You can't sit there and trust them. Some of these guys will come on later years, but for now, it's a B for me. Moving on to the Saints, our final team of the night. It starts with round 1, Marcus Davenport, defensive end. They traded a lot to get this guy, Drew. They offered up another first-round pick to move up and get this defensive end. Look, he played 40% of the snaps, even though none of these games counted as a start for him. But I still say 40% of the defensive snaps is a pretty good line for a rookie, right?
It is. Real quick, Chris says an A. I'm glad you agree with me. I think that those 2 picks are definitely higher than a B rating. Oh, when you talk about the Marcus Davenport pick, I like it. I do like it. But was it worth the value of trading him up? That's where I think the issue comes along the line. You know, he played 13 games. He had 4.5 sacks. He did get to the quarterback a lot. He had 12 quarterback hits. That's something you want to see, but when you give up something like that, you're talking about an all-star. You're talking about a guy that comes onto that field and changes how teams have to be on that field.
Could it be because they have Cam Jordan as well? And they have Cam Jordan, who's such a highlight player. He's always in there making sacks. Could he have sucked the air out of the room?
Wouldn't that have been a little bit easier? You're getting the double team on Cam.
If you're talking about a team that's totally bereft of talent, yes, I'd say that. Where you're the only guy in the defensive line, yeah, you get the attention. But if you're talking about a mid-range guy,
you also have Sheldon Rankins, who was playing, a Pro Bowl caliber season before he went down in injury. I mean, you're talking about 2 guys on there, and he had an opportunity to get there. I mean, I'm not mad about it. I think the guy's still a great pickup. I just think that they could have waited a little bit.
They spent too much on him.
They spent too much to come up and get him.
I can understand that. Absolutely. JP, do you like the Davenport move? Did they make the right move going and getting the pass rusher? Because they saw this as the move that's going to complete the team. They needed the extra pass rusher to play opposite of Cam Jordan. Do you see this as the right move, or should they have kind of held on to their pick and waited to draft a guy until this year?
If it was me, I probably would have held on to the pick, but I think what's important about Davenport is that you have to remember where he went to college. He went to UTSA, where he was literally playing against boys for the entire time. And maybe it's just a bit more of an
acclimate. How many girls did these other guys play against?
Well, okay. 0.
I get what you're saying, though. You're right. It was UTSA. He's not going up against top-tier talent. But then again, we've had other guys come out of Division II football that
I want to play
well.
against women.
I don't. Have you seen some of these women in some of these women's ice hockey leagues? Oh, no. I'm good on that.
I don't know. Ask Damon. What does he know?
Going forward, back to these picks, though, I still like the Davenport pick, but I'm not in love with it. Kind of like you said, they gave up a lot to get him. Maybe he turns into that guy going forward, but they gave up a lot. He's going to need to develop more along the line if he's going to live up to that value.
Absolutely.
But here's a pick I am in love with for them. The 3rd round, because they didn't have a 2nd-round pick, Traquan Smith, wide receiver. The guy, 427 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's first-round numbers, to be honest with you. Those are numbers that could probably go in the 1st round a lot of years. The guy is an absolute steal, and you were sitting there telling me it's because he's got Drew Brees at quarterback. And I'll buy some of that. I'll buy some of that. But on the other hand, Drew, there's a lot of guys, there's Michael Thomas on the Saints. There's a lot of other guys that can be catching the ball from Drew Brees, especially because the Saints have moved away from a passing offense and tried to run the ball a lot more, putting up almost 450 yards and putting up 5 touchdowns for a rookie. Absolutely fantastic. This guy, the sky's the limit, I think, and you're going to see him as the number 2 receiver before long in New Orleans.
don't get me wrong. I like him as a player. I think he will develop into a better player because of Drew Brees. But let's throw him somewhere else. Let's throw him over there with any other quarterback that isn't Drew Brees, that isn't Tom Brady, who isn't Aaron Rodgers, and see how he goes, because I don't really see him being able to do that. These numbers. Do I think he can get there with another quarterback? Yes, but luckily he doesn't have to, at least for the next couple of years. He gets Drew Brees to throw the ball to him. But you're right. His receptions are down to 28. I think he was only targeted like 44 times. But, of course, when you have someone like Michael Thomas who gets the ball every time thrown to him, you're going to not have these great numbers. But it was their next pick. They obviously, like you said, they didn't have a second-round pick. They went wide receiver. They obviously felt like that was a need. It turned out to be a huge need with Ginn going down. So I like the pick. I absolutely do. I'm just not as high on it as you are.
I'm absolutely high on it. JP, what did you think about Traquan Smith going in the third round?
I like the pick, but I think for the Saints, with them having the second wide receiver problems all year, it probably needed to come a year sooner.
It takes time to build. I agree. You make a great point there where he didn't necessarily live up to it because they did have second wide receiver problems. Ted Ginn wasn't really the guy. They didn't really have anyone else step up into that role. Even Traquan Smith, to his credit, was not the number 2 receiver they probably could have used if they were going to the Super Bowl. But it's tough when you've got a guy like Michael Thomas that's sucking all the air out of the room. He's getting all these receptions, and you're talking about the Saints that want to run the ball anyway. There's not a lot of receptions to go around. So to sit there and get targeted as many times, he only had 28 receptions, but he had 450 yards almost. He had 5 touchdowns, so he was a red zone threat on top of it. I think for a rookie season, it's absolutely fantastic. I can't sit there and I think this is one of the steals of the draft as well. Not just because I drafted him in my Dynasty League, but because
that's why
he's an absolutely fantastic receiver. Chris also agrees with us. He says the trade wasn't necessarily worth the pick for Marcus Davenport. He also says he's going to be a top-tier receiver, talking about Traquan Smith. And Steve says he'll be a top 10 receiver in 2 years. That might be a little high, Steve, but I like the optimism. I like that you're as high on this guy as I am. I think he's going to develop into that next, maybe not quite Michael Thomas guy, but he's going to have a lot of receptions. We'll be talking about this guy if he stays in the Saints with Drew Brees.
What about Des Bryant? Did he get a lot of receptions?
He didn't, but he didn't get a lot of practice in either. I mean, he hurt himself in the first one, so maybe next year. Talking about the rest of the Saints draft, I want to go quick through this so we can go watch that Duke game really quick. Nobody stuck around on this team. They cut their 4th-round pick. They cut their 5th-round pick. They cut both of their 6th-round picks, and all of those guys went on to other teams and made it onto those teams. When I look at the rest of this draft, Drew, there's nothing there. It's bereft of anyone else. So you got 2 players out of this draft. Did they do well enough to get a good grade from you?
I'm going to give him a C+. And I like these top 2 picks. I just don't know if that's exactly where they should have got Marcus Davenport. Should they have traded all that capital to get him? I don't really know. Traquan Smith, it was obviously a need. They needed a second receiver ever since Brandon Cooks was gone. So I like these picks, but it just wasn't enough for me to give him a high grade, so I had to give him a C+.
I'm actually going to go a bit lower than you. I'm actually going to give him a C here. But maybe that's a little bit unfair just because the Saints are a really good team and don't exactly need all the rookies right now. But when you only have 3 people that stick and 2 that are actually important,
right?
It's going to be something that's very.
It's a negative for sure.
Yeah.
I'll agree with you on that. I mean, you can't cut 4 mid-range guys and sit there and tell me you had a good draft. I'm still going to give him a B though. I'm going to give him a slightly above average grade because I think
you're in love with Traquan Smith.
Yeah, that's an A+ for me. Getting a guy like that in the 3rd round, that's fantastic. Even more than that, though, Marcus Davenport, I believe, is going to evolve into that guy. They didn't use him as a starter this year. I think next year they probably will see him starting a lot more games. So I still like those picks, and my rule has always been hit at the top of the draft. Everything else is icing on the cake. They did that. They had 2 picks in the top 3 rounds, and they hit home runs with those guys. Or at the very least, they had solid picks out of Marcus Davenport. So I got to give them a B. They did better than a lot of other teams did because a lot of these teams, you look at some of their 1st, 2nd, 3rd round guys, didn't do so well.
Real quick, Chris had a C-, B had
Steve had
a B-, and Jerry had a C. So they're all kind of right where
We're
we are.
across the board. Yeah, I agree. Maybe I'm a little higher on it than everybody else is, but I understand your thought process. I understand you sitting there saying they cut 4 guys and they went on to other teams. That's kind of a negative for me.
No,
I agree with you there.
For me, it's not that. That happens in drafts, unfortunately for them.
But 4 out of your 6 picks,
Yes,
Drew?
absolutely it happens. There's a lot of teams that a lot of their picks don't stick around. It's just what happens in the NFL, especially when you're a really good team and you're drafting for a backup or you're drafting hope that they could replace someone that's just average on your team. So this happens to really good teams in their drafts. My issue why it's a C+ is a Davenport. Is it worth that much? It's a guy that didn't play all 16 games. You know, it's his numbers weren't where it should be. When you give up multiple first rounds, you're talking.
You want to see.
You're talking
that
about
elite level production.
you're talking about a quarterback that's your future, or you're talking about a guy that goes out there and gets double digit sacks. He wasn't that. Like you said, he might develop there, but just too much right off the bat.
You're right. He wasn't Bradley Chubb, but maybe he gets there one day. We'll see. Steve also says AFC East on Friday. You got it, Steve. AFC East on Friday, confirmed. Moving on, guys. Drew, I want to give some special thanks before we go watch this Duke game. Go ahead. Who do we need to thank on the show?
Yeah, guys, always remember to like, share, and comment. We appreciate all your guys' input. We love talking sports with you guys. Just a real quick special thanks to Jerry, Nathan, Shannon, Sharif, Matthew, Michael, John, Adam, Luke, Ryan, Michael, Will, Steve, Gary, Jeremy, Damon, Chris. I love the fact that I had to go through all those names. It's so awesome. Thank you guys for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. The show is so much better with you guys. If we missed you, we're sorry about that, but your contribution was great as well. It was a great show, guys, and it was better because you were here and giving your opinion along with us. It was a lot of fun. I can't wait to talk AFC East with you on Friday. JP, again, special thanks to you for showing up. We appreciate the help grading this NFC South draft class and the Machado talk, as well as Duke UNC. Guys, we're Sports Around the Bar. I'm Jake, your bartender. This is Drew. JP's our special guest, and we will see you guys on Friday.
See ya.